Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have a very special guest. We have Kathleen Waid, who is ex CRO and also running a fractional CRO business that she started to hopefully help get to more companies some of her expertise and guide them on the right path as it goes to revenue. But thanks so much for taking the time, Kathleen.
No, I appreciate you asking me.
Awesome. Well, before we get into, as we normally do, kind of top strategies for driving execution excellence, wanted the audience to get to know you a little bit and why they should be taking their advice today. So, would love to hear a bit about your path to revenue leadership and the CRO role through some of your experience.
Yeah, so thank you for asking me that question. My path really was through sales. I started my career early as a fraud leader in a bank. I ran across a company that we implemented a neural network solution back in the 90s, so machine learning based solution to prevent fraud. And I became an operational expert in how to use scoring models in preventing credit card authorization fraud. That company recruited me and quickly put me as an SME for sales. And it was the SME first. And I'm thinking, wow, these guys are making a lot of money. Why aren't I selling? So very quickly after the SME role for about 6 months, I'm like, yes, I want a quota and I want to move into sales because I want to make the money that they're making. And that's what kind of started me on the path to revenue leadership. So spent a good number of years as an individual contributor, moved into sales management, had the opportunity to expand my role in various forms of sales management, and then eventually was promoted internally at an early stage company to the CRO position.
Awesome. Awesome. And how different is that? Because a lot of people, I think that the CRO is just a more senior sales title. In my perspective, it is incredibly different. What's your perspective on that and having gone through that transition from sales to CRO?
Oh, you're going to get me started now, aren't you? Yeah, so a CRO is not a sales leader. I've actually written about this as well. It's one component. Sales is one component of the revenue function. The way I look at it, there are four material components in a SaaS organization. First is marketing, top of funnel. Who's generating revenue? Like who's generating top of funnel pipeline and what are we doing to achieve that? So marketing is the first component that a CRO should typically have control of. After marketing, you have all things sales, sales engineering, SMEs, everything that feeds the pipeline. So marketing, then sales. When I think about revenue, it's like, okay, I've sold a deal. Fantastic. How do I get that revenue live? Do I have an implementation cycle I have to go through to recognize the revenue? So implementation, shortening the cycle, making it super easy for the customer. That's a part of your revenue chain. And then you wrap up with customer success, net revenue retention. Am I growing my existing customers? What kind of churn rates do I have? Each one of those four pillars, so marketing, all things sales, implementation or getting revenue live, and then customer success as net revenue retention, each one of those four pillars is the foundation for measurement of the entire revenue prediction, right? So if you're just a sale, not, I shouldn't say just, but if you own sales, you're likely forecasting bookings. You're not necessarily forecasting revenue. Revenue is quite different than I've signed an ACV contract. What companies typically care about is the actual revenue number.
And that sounds like a lot. And maybe we can dig into as part of these, strategies. How do you become an expert or very effective in each of them, especially when you come from likely one of them, maybe, one and a half of them, like even being an excellent CS leader or implementation leader, sales leader, marketing leader is incredibly challenging. So it
Mhm.
seems like a tall order to, be responsible for each of those categories. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a tall order. And what has driven success is hiring people smarter than you in the roles that you're not an expert in and being really comfortable with it. Like, hey, I've never done marketing. I've never owned marketing on my own as a single job. So I look for people who are the experts. I turn to them and say, hey, you're the expert. What do you recommend? 90% of the time I'm agreeing and I'm learning. It's a two-way street, the learning street, right? The other, most of the time I'm knocking down walls and empowering the marketing leader to execute what they say they're going to execute. And then I'm holding them accountable to that,
Mm.
right? Like you've got a budget of $1 million. In exchange for that budget of $1 million, the goal was to create top of funnel pipeline of $20 million, right? So we got to measure that. We got to stay on track with that. We got to know when we spend those dollars, that those dollars are well spent and we're getting the returns in the top of funnel pipeline. And so, when you hire people, I'm always looking for people I can learn from and people I can teach in the same, like, again, two-way street. But if you find an expert, a CRO who's done each one of those jobs individually, congratulations, right? From me, I haven't. I've just hired well, and then I've learned along the way, and then I've become maybe not as an expert as they are, but I've become knowledgeable enough to drive the processes that drive revenue.
Totally. And that maybe the perfect transition to the first topic we're going to talk about, kind of starting from the end, as you said before, but starting with this idea of driving accountability, empowerment, and measurement. What does that mean to you, and why is that so important to success?
So accountability, empowerment, and measurement is important when you're forecasting revenue. The CRO's job is to say, we're going to make X in revenue in 2025, right? I'm 2Xing over last year, whatever the numbers are. But that goal, that revenue goal you have for 2025 still locks down into the four components, the way I think of it, the four components in each one of those pillars. So I got to break that number down into measurable insights into each one of those components. So again, marketing, top of funnel. I need 50% of my top of funnel to come from marketing. And again, I'm saying top of funnel. I'm not saying marketing qualified leads, not a fan of those. But what is in pipeline that has been generated via marketing? I can create goals around that. If I don't have that pipeline and enough coverage ratio in that pipeline to feed my sales team, then guess what? My sales team has to overperform. If my coverage ratio is something like 4-1, so I want 4x pipeline to my one goal, and I expect 50% of it to come from marketing and 50% of it to come from my BDR work, my sales leads, my references, wherever the other source is, let's just call it sales. If one of them falls down, another area has to pick up on that. So I need to always be knowing, are we hitting our targets? Is something not working? How do we fix it? Right? Are we not spending money wisely? So those components, and just like top of funnel is one small example, is if you're not measuring that and you're not holding people accountable to what they've signed up for, or you agreed to, and then empowering them to do it, right? So I was just on with a client today. We went through our marketing budget for 2025, asking for a lot of things, talking about how we're going to measure it. You can't half the budget and expect for the same results, right? So when I think about accountability, it's just the KPIs, the numbers that each person is contributing to that chain of events. So same thing with implementations. If my implementation is expected to be 3 months and now they're averaging 4, guess what? I've just pushed back revenue by a month for every deal I've closed. Now I've got a revenue hole that I've got to fill. How am I going to fill that? Well, I'm going to go knock on customer success doors and say, we have to do some more cross-selling, because now I have this revenue hole because implementations have fallen low. So now I got to go cross-sell. So when I think about accountability and measurement, it's like you always have to have that dashboard of knowledge of everything that rolls up into the revenue forecast that you provided, and where's the weakest link in the chain, or what part of the chain is just overperforming and killing it that we should throw more at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the master dashboard that you always have to have your eyes on, and ensuring that each part of those pillars or that chain are empowered to execute, not stopping to ask for permission, right? They're empowered to go do it. So I feel really passionate about hiring really well, empowering those people, making sure that you're aligned on what the KPIs are, and then knocking down walls for when things get in their way.
And that maybe the toughest question is, how do you balance, the empowerment part with the accountability, right? Because those conversations sometimes seem like, I mean, I understand that in theory, they're two sides of the same coin, but it doesn't necessarily feel that way from a human dimension, right? You're like, hey, this is the thing you're in charge of. And yes, how much can I help you? And I feel like, at least personally, and this is probably similar to every human, it's like the more you help them, you're kind of sometimes taking away the accountability, because you're like, there's other things that can help with this. that maybe
Mhm.
could have or should have not happened. So I'm curious to get your take on how you think about balancing those two forces of, you know, unblocking things for them, but still keeping it in their court of
Mm.
that complete accountability.
Yeah, so unblocking things for them and still keeping it in their court. A
Do you know what I
couple,
mean by that?
I know I do. I
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Don't you end up doing the work, right? Like,
That's what I mean. Like, how much of it is up to me because there are things that I can help with? Well, could you have been able to do this without me helping? Is this a bonus or is this a requirement? And how do you balance
yeah.
those two opposing forces?
Hmm. So very early on in my career, I had a boss that taught me see one, do one, teach one. And so I will do it for you once, right? And so that's you seeing it done, right? If I know how to do it, right? That's assuming I know how to do it. So see me do it, then you do it, and then you're teaching somebody else to do it. So,
Mm,
if somebody's never done it before and you have expertise, you as a leader should say, hey, listen, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to do this for you. You and I are going to walk through it, and then you're going to own the next one, right? And then when the next person comes along, you're going to teach that next person. So, as leaders, and it's what I like early stage companies, I have no problems rolling up my sleeves and doing the work. And that's how you earn mutual respect too. Okay. Hell, if Kathleen can do it, I certainly can do it, right?
yeah.
So that's how I've been able to balance I want to help you be successful. But at the same time, on the accountability, I find that a lot of people stray away from the hard discussions, like the really hard discussions, and you have to have them. It's not fair to the receiving party if you catch them off guard, right? Is not everything's going to go well. I do a lot of things wrong all the time. And there has to be this culture and environment to be able to say, yeah, okay, I messed up. It happens, right? What am I going to do to fix it and own the mess that I've created?
Mm.
So that's also part of empowerment. People being comfortable and not having to feel like they got a CYA or,
Then you
office.
waste so much energy on that piece. Yeah, which is annoying.
It's totally annoying. So, um, you know, the direct conversations, see one, do one, teach one, and to make it okay to make mistakes, fail fast type of approach. But not too often either.
Yeah. No, I really like that. I'm gonna steal that. The see one, do one, teach one, because I find myself getting very hands-on, often because I love to do the thing, but you can't make your team success in how do you share the accountability and responsibility, but still making it fair that you have clear expectations. So doing it once is very clear.
Yeah.
What do you expect? And then you're like,
Hmm.
well, I just did this. What didn't you, it makes it clear. Then you pass on to them, but then they're also doing the same thing for the rest of the company. I love that kind of holistic
Yeah.
approach.
And you know what? You often find when after they see you do one and they do one, they may have some better idea you had, which is fantastic, right? Welcome that. Like way better than what I thought of. Thank you for improving it.
Yeah.
Right. So that just comes back to the human element of empowering people.
Yeah.
Like, you know, very thoughtful in how you respond to constructive criticism that's coming your way, which you should, again, be open and wanting, even as a leader. And then that creates this two-way street where it's easier to have the harder conversations when things aren't going as well as you expected.
Totally. Totally. Well, I definitely have some stuff to practice what we're preaching here on that. But shifting gears to the next piece, which is kind of similar in terms of the expectation setting component of what we're talking about, which is clear compensation and
Mhm.
aligning to company goals.
Yep.
I see this wrong a lot, and then like done wrong a lot, I think. But then also it's like, well, if it was obvious, wouldn't it be done right? So there's clearly some complexity here. So curious to get your take on how to align compensation to company goals.
Yeah, so top-down approach, right? So you know what the company goal is from a revenue perspective or a retention perspective or specific products that you're launching and you want to, see certain win rates. Once the company establishes that, that's the foundation for your comp planning. And everything in your comp planning goes back to what the EXCO or ET team has decided are the goals of the organization that will feed that revenue engine. So I often find that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on compensation for salespeople. And many of those people have never carried a bag. And I find that frustrating, right?
Yes.
So, and I'm not shy. So I typically say, I don't think you've had this experience before. However, let's think like a salesperson would think and do like a salesperson would do. Again, early on in my career, I had a sales leader that told me to plan your work and work your plan. And that really stuck with me throughout the years when I'm writing comp plans, I am ensuring that, here are the company goals, and here's how I'm incenting people to achieve those goals in their compensation plan. And I'm making it very simple and very clear. The challenges that you get into, I think, in compensation planning is people want exceptions, or they sit there and I say penny wise, pound foolish. They worry that a salesperson is going to make $1 million. I'm like, okay, but if we paid a person $1 million, what would we want for the company in exchange for that $1 million? Like, let's stop worrying about, oh, we're going to have one person make a lot of money. What are we as the company getting in exchange for that lot of money? Because I can tell you, when you see that one person making a boatload of money, you're motivating the rest of the sales team to behave like that person, right? So when I think about clear comp planning, it's like, let's not lose sight of the goals of the company through some of these exception processes. That person doesn't deserve those kind of dollars. Well, they kind of do when they've delivered against the goals that the company has set.
Yeah.
So um, I think that we always have to remind ourselves that salespeople are, hired engines. I was going to say hired guns. I don't know if that's appropriate anymore, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah, we're saying
Okay, let's say it.
it.
And we do motivate them through very clear compensation planning. And as a
They
CEO,
take the risk, right? That's the thing that I think these other people don't understand is typically 50%, maybe even more of their take home money for their family is in risking, you know, the product working, other resources internally. So they should get compensated for the risk. And I
yeah,
think the people in the other roles just look at the total amount from these top performers and they don't take into account, well, there could be years and there's probably a lot of other people on the team that aren't making that. And like you're saying, if they close the $10 million deal, their comp percent should stay the same because it's the same. If anything, it actually should go up because they're spending fewer resources on a larger outcome. So like, I think it goes down a lot. That's why accelerators make a lot of sense because you're
yeah,
spending the same internal resources for a larger output.
yeah. No, I agree with all those comments. I think that, there's a lot of distrust in compensation planning and compensation announcements. And that's because, throughout the years, whether the perception is true or not, it is a perception that's true to the individual. There's enough salespeople that felt that they got screwed over by a particular comp plan. So the distrust is something that as leaders you need to acknowledge and you need to really tamp down. As a CRO, I've always fought with my CFO to pay the people. I'm like, because the damage when you don't pay the people, or the damage when you lessen the amount of payment that was expected out of some loophole, is much greater than just paying the people. So, in the compensation planning, you always try to think of all the scenarios of how people will work their plan, and you're going to miss some. So, I tend to like to announce the plan, review it, have a spreadsheet, talk people through it. Like, here's some scenarios. This is how you make your money. Make sure people, and then understand where their concerns are and really directly address them, whether it's a real concern that we can address, or I hear what you're saying, but we're not going to change it. And here's why.
Yeah.
Don't let that shit linger.
Yeah,
Um,
the trust with one person could go to the whole organization, and I've seen that in those stories. That's what everyone ends up talking about for like that month, and then it's in the back of everyone's head. And the other piece that I always think about too, it's inherent no matter how well you plan territories and accounts, is it is unfair. It's objectively unfair
mhm,
in a risk that you're taking and a roll of the dice what territories and accounts you get that year. You don't know who's going to spend. Like the worst seller might make the most money one year. So having
right.
that trust long term with your company that you are going to make it fair and over the long term, it makes sense, I think is really, really important. And again, if you're not in the field and taking those risks yourselves, you're never going to understand that dimension of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel then, and now it's comp planning season, right? A lot of SCOs are happening, plans are being launched, plans have been launched already. And just, ensuring that people know how to work their plan and plan their work to maximize their income. And that shouldn't be, I feel like people kind of, they're like, oh, that's a salesperson. Well, yes, that's a salesperson. Like it's what's driving your organization's growth. So let's just be very mindful and empathetic to the risks that they take, as you say. And, this is their chosen career, but it's also the fuel, it's the engine, like the fuel in the engine of the car that's going to go somewhere. Without it, you go nowhere. And there just needs to be a little bit of compassion and respect when it comes to sales comp planning and trust that's built with the sales team that they will get paid as expected.
Totally. Yeah, interesting time of year as people sort that out. But transitioning to the last piece, and maybe the most important, it's the core of all the things we're talking about. It's the core of the top of funnel, the process to close a deal, to onboard and renew or potentially grow or churn is the why.
Mhm.
Understanding at the core, how does this impact a business? And I think there's so many things, like, right, the topics we've already talked about, we could talk about for hours, so many more things, but this is at the core of everything. And sometimes it feels hard to pay attention to this because it isn't necessarily outputs day to day, but it's kind of, again, what's driving everything at the heart of a business. So excited to get your take on, the why and how do you get a whole revenue in a whole company, right? This starts at the CEO and board, not even just the CRO level. It's so important to deeply understand why customers want to talk to you, why they raise their hand, why they renew or churn.
Yeah. So part of my fractional work, I just kind of stumbled through this process, but part of the fractional work, when I talk with new prospective clients, I spend a bunch of time interviewing different people in the organization and sometimes some of their customers. And it's so dramatic every single time I do it. I will ask a sales leader, why, just give me the top three reasons on why somebody has bought your solution. I will ask the head of product. I will ask the CEO. I will ask the customer eventually, right? When in this whole process, I've never had a consistent answer from a company where everyone always says generally the same thing, right? Earlier stage companies tend to focus on them. Well, we do this really well, and our data is so awesome, and we, and me. And it's never, not never, but it's rare for me to find a company that gives you the why from the client's perspective. So one of my first clients, it was just profoundly a huge problem where they wanted to move from a very complex sales cycle into enterprise selling. And when I did my interviews, everybody's answer was different, but everybody's answer was about how great their tech was. Early stage companies love their own tech, right? CEOs love their own tech, and nobody's going to love the tech as much as the CEO, but that's not why people buy, ever. The why is always from the client perspective, right? So I was talking with somebody today who said, they buy because we save them time. I'm like, well, what do you save them time doing? Oh, we save them time doing XYZ. Well, when they do XYZ, what does that result in? Like, you've got to like keep asking the questions to get to the material reason of why the clients actually do buy. And then that's the foundation for your ROI. So in those interviews across the orgs, it's like internally do it. Like if you're listening to this podcast, go interview 5 different people at the organization. Just say, what are the top 3 reasons you think people buy our solution? And you hopefully you get the same answers, right? Hopefully they're from the client perspective, but it's a really good exercise and everybody in the company should have the same darn answer. And if you don't, that's a great place to do some team building exercises, some team exercises on consistency and message across the organization on your value prop.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into selling the what.
Yeah.
And then you think you're selling the why when you're selling the how. And that's
Mhm.
where we kind of got stuck for a while, candidly. Is like, okay, we're not selling the features, but we're selling like how to do the thing, which is kind of in this weird middle ground where I think can be a red herring because some people will buy for that reason because they'll be able to, a fraction of your potential customers will be able to translate, oh, we help you save time by doing this. Well, it's not a why, but they can make that mental leap of, oh, I get what you're doing and I get how you do it. So I can fill in the blank. But then you're
Yeah.
only really selling, what we found is you're selling to 20% of the market.
Hmm.
We were
Yeah.
successful for too long selling that. And we're finding the people that really got it just got it. And we weren't looking at ourselves and saying, well, are we making it hard for the average person to get it? And so only a fraction of the really smart people out there that like deeply have thought about this problem and solution are getting it. And I think you can get stuck there. At least that was kind of our experience.
You know, that's a familiar experience, right? We get so drinking the Kool-Aid, right, that we forget how the Kool-Aid was, the flavor of the Kool-Aid. Like, this is not a great analogy, but I often tell new people who join an organization that I'm at as like, please don't drink the Kool-Aid. Like, we're going to tell you how we think we should be positioning ourselves, but I want your genuine first reaction to this. Like, is it compelling? Does it
Mhm.
hit the nail on the head? I'm also a big believer in having SMEs in-house, people that have done the job, that understand the pain, that can speak to the clients and prospects. Goes back to my first job, right? I was a fraud expert in preventing credit card fraud. When I talk to the credit card fraud people, we talk the same language, right? So I also believe in just having a firm SME in-house that can be that facilitator of truly understanding where your customers are coming from on the why. And the why exercise, I think, is just, it's a really easy thing to do. And every time I ask a person that question, they're like, hmm. And then I know that we've got some work to do.
Totally. And related to that, and I go back and forth on this all the time, depends on what day, is what's your thought on the importance of hiring people with industry expertise versus just great sellers? Because
Mm,
half of me wants to think, well, if you're a great seller and you can dig into the why, you can learn that pretty fast. But then parts of me, I'm like, once I'm doing a job for 2 or 3 years and I've spent so much time with this type of customer, it's just automatic. You talk to this persona, that like you just nail it
yeah.
and have that instinct. So I'm curious to get your take after seeing a number of teams. What do you think is more important? The right, obviously there's a baseline on each of them, but is it more important to understand just as a seller how to get to that why, or is there a requirement sometimes for that industry expertise to ramp up successfully?
So I'm gonna answer your question directly, and you're
Good.
making me choose between two. So if I could either have just an excellent seller or an industry expert, I would probably put that on some type of scale. The more complex the product, the more complex the problem,
Yep.
right? So selling into a large financial institution, that those can be very complex, very detailed. I'd rather have an industry expert, right? As I go down the scale to less complex, maybe easier understood over time, I'd rather have a really great seller. In the ideal world, you have both, right? You
Mhm.
have the great sellers that are supported by an SME, and the great sellers use those SMEs as tools in their sales cycle, right? Like after the discovery phase, you got enough information, you want to come back to the client and be really clear on how and articulate how you're going to solve that problem. You bring the SME at that point in time because they may hear things, again, they have a different credibility level that you have as well as a seller. So they serve a certain purpose. You do a proof
Mhm.
of value, a proof of concept. I want the SME delivering the results, not the salesperson, right? And you can share an SME across many salespeople. So in my world, I'd like to have both. But if you're forcing me, I'd put them on that scale, more complex SME, less complex, great seller.
Totally. It's funny because yeah, I can make the argument for both, but then when I think about complex organization, I'm like, oh, the sales skills you need, even if you're saying the right things to get a deal done, the different levels you need to get to, and the executives. Sometimes I find that the SMEs spend too much time below the line, like with
Yeah.
the doers, and everyone's like, why can't we get this done? We all understand it so well, and you're like, but you're not translating it to the people that actually make the decisions, and then vice versa. Well, you're doing such a good job with these people, and they go to their team to ask for feedback. And they're like, I don't see how it's different than what we're doing today because they didn't get to the granular level. So yeah, you definitely need to nail both.
Yeah. So you agree with me. We should have both. We should spend the money to hire both and
Yeah, the
maximize.
ACV is large enough. It's like we should be winning a higher percentage and larger amounts of these big deals. Why are you messing around with having to pick? So I agree. But no, this is awesome. Time definitely flew by. But no, thank you so much for taking the time, Kathleen. I feel like when you talk to people that get it, they just keep things simple. And I was like, why does this stuff sound so simple when you say it? But you go back and do it. And all the companies are making these mistakes. It's hard to balance, getting to that why, nailing those comp plans, um, driving that accountability and empowerment. It's a lot harder to do than it is to speak about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
And if folks are looking to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
KathleenWaid.com, WAID. So I have a website. You can schedule time with me on a Calendly if you'd like to. And I talk a little bit about my services.
Amazing. Well, thanks again for the time, Kathleen. This is awesome.
All right. Thank you.